Our small town was plagued by a series of horrific murders. The victims, once targeted, would mysteriously drop dead on the third day, leaving no trace but some scattered remains. I was a witness to the 12th murder. The killer saw me and was about to silence me, but I uttered a single sentence just before the knife fell. He spared me. The next day, he was apprehended. And on the third day, he died suddenly. Later, I discovered that what I had said was the true reason I survived. Alright, folks. This is a chilling mystery. If you're easily spooked, make sure you have a brave friend with you. The story begins. After the serial killer was caught, he became extremely agitated. He vehemently denied any involvement in the cases, insisting he hadn't killed or dismembered anyone. He painted himself as a pitiful victim of injustice. In reality, his crimes were monstrous, utterly devoid of humanity. Investigations revealed that in less than 2 weeks, there had been 12 identified victims and over 10 missing persons. The method of attack was largely consistent. Victims would suddenly die at night, and by the third day, only fragmented remains of their bodies were found. The missing individuals vanished without a trace. No one believed his lies. He was arrested at the scene of the 12th murder, with irrefutable evidence and no alibis for the other crimes. The facts were clear, leaving no room for denial. The entire town was convinced he was the killer. He was incarcerated, awaiting trial. But on the third day after his arrest, he died suddenly. Just like his victims, his body found severely mutilated. Even more terrifying, the number of missing persons continued to climb. This included curious onlookers, private investigators, and even police officers. The horror didn't end with the killer's death. It escalated. The town was gripped by fear. Everyone on edge, terrified of becoming the next victim. Theories abounded. Some whispered that there wasn't just one killer, that accomplices were still at large, and the arrested man had been silenced. Others claimed it wasn't murder at all, but a curse. As the sole survivor and witness of the serial killings, I became a figure of both luck to some and suspicion to others. I was just an ordinary person, like most in this small town, with a low-paying job and a tiny apartment barely big enough for one. My life was a monotonous cycle of work, sleep, and just getting by. I was a loner, rarely interacting with anyone unless absolutely necessary. My encounter with the killer was purely accidental. That day, I shouldn't have opened that door after hearing that sound. I saw something I would never forget. Afterward, I was interrogated countless times. The scene was seared into my mind. I wished to erase it, but some wouldn't let me. As more people disappeared from town, a private investigator named Jack approached me a week after the murders. He began to hound me relentlessly, following me to and from work like a stalker. He'd question me about my experience, regardless of the setting, trying to find inconsistencies in my words and actions. He even suspected I was the mastermind. This severely disrupted my life, causing everyone I knew to avoid me. I feared losing my job. Finally, I snapped, trying to get rid of Jack. "I've told the police everything," I said. "You can ask them. The officer who took your statement is also missing," he replied. This startled me, and I grew even more resistant to his absurd accusations. I started to wonder if the town's rumors were true, that touching this case invited a curse. No matter how I argued, Jack persisted, even spreading rumors that I was a suspect, making it impossible for me to work normally. Annoyed, I denied his ridiculous theories countless times and tried every method to make him leave. But nothing worked. In the end, I agreed to talk properly. Just tell me the truth and prove what you say is real, and I'll clear your name and stop bothering you, he said. I looked at his smug, confident face and thought, I hope you won't regret this. It was the first time I'd invited someone into my home. Located in the shanty town, it was a dilapidated shack. I pushed open the rickety front door and walked down the dark hallway. My room was on the right. How pathetic, Jack scoffed, not bothering to hide his disdain. My hand paused on the doorknob. My meager income barely covers the rent here, I said. Someone with a respectable job like his, of course, wouldn't understand. But as the door opened, his scornful expression suddenly changed. Before I could even agree, he pushed past me and poked his head into the room. He sniffed deeply. What's that amazing smell? What have you been eating? I looked down at my empty, rumbling stomach. I wasn't used to interacting with people, but I felt I should say something. After a long pause, I managed a stiff reply, thanks to you. I haven't had a proper meal in 2 days. His gaze swept around the room, and he looked at me with a smirk, as if saying, you little trickster. Do you really think I'm that easily fooled? I avoided his sarcastic gaze and stepped into the room. What do you want to know? Ask away. So suddenly cooperative? He eyed me up and down. I just have a feeling you won't tell the truth. If you don't believe me, leave, I said, avoiding his gaze and impatiently pointing towards the door. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Don't be so sensitive, he said, ignoring my gesture. He made himself at home, pulling over the only chair in my place and sitting down. I was helpless against this rogue. He was strong, a foot taller than me. If he didn't want to leave, I couldn't make him. That was the main reason I hadn't been able to shake him for days. He sniffed the air again, seemingly intrigued by what I had eaten in the room. But with serious business at hand, he didn't linger on the topic. All right, he said. Tell me what you encountered that day. That day, I narrowly escaped death. Talking to strangers made me uncomfortable, and Jack was both helpless and dangerous. I quickly moved to the furthest corner, putting as much distance between us as possible in the small room. I began to recall the events of that day with difficulty. I shouldn't have opened that door. What door? He asked, his expression serious, like a detective. He clasped his hands, resting his chin on them, interrogating me like a criminal. The victim's door? I nodded with difficulty, my gaze fixed on the door. The events of that night replayed vividly in my mind. I felt as if I could see the corridor and the slightly ajar door at the other end through my own door. I ran a hand through my hair, irritated. If I'd known this would happen, I would have pretended not to hear anything. Jack seemed intrigued. What did you hear? I heard, wait. He suddenly interrupted me again. He craned his neck, sniffing the air again. What exactly are you hiding in your house? What are you even here for? I asked, annoyed. His gaze swept around my easily visible room again. Finding nothing, he steered the conversation back. "Keep going," he said. I took a deep breath, suppressing the urge to lash out. I skipped the details. I heard a strange sound, so I went to the door next door. The door wasn't closed. I looked inside and was discovered by the killer. I almost got killed. Later, I escaped and called the police. He was arrested. "Hold on," Jack interrupted, unable to tolerate my perfunctory explanation. "You're not trying to fool me with some children's story, are you?" "I'm telling the truth," I insisted. "Don't give me that nonsense. Tell me the truth," he warned, his gaze sharp. "Otherwise, I'll spread rumors that you're the real killer. You know I have connections." Of course. I knew. Anyone working as a private investigator in this remote town had connections, both legitimate and illicit. The number of missing persons continued to rise. And allegedly, even more had vanished from the criminal underworld. Jack must have been hired for a case, which was why he was bothering me. He'd probably investigated thoroughly, understanding my routine and personality. Perhaps his investigation had hit a wall, which brought him back to me. Even with my alibis for multiple murders, and having already told them everything I knew, they still didn't believe me. It must have been the disappearances driving people crazy. So desperate they wouldn't even spare me, hoping to find a clue from me, the eyewitness. If I didn't cooperate, the next step might be framing me. I slowly pieced this together, then asked, frustrated, "I'm telling you the facts. What do you want?" "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything. In detail," he said, his expression grim, staring at me like a prosecutor. "Don't miss a single detail. Don't try to fool me. I wasn't good at dealing with people." His attitude made me increasingly agitated and nervous. My throat's dry. "I need some water first." He seemed to find my apartment a bit stuffy too. He stopped me as I went to pour water, instructing, "Pour me a glass too." I had no choice but to pour him a glass. He seemed parched. He just sniffed it to make sure it was all right, then chugged the entire glass. After drinking, he sniffed the air again, then tugged at his collar with a frown. "All right. Tell me. Start from before you got home that day." Holding my half-empty glass of water, I stood in the furthest corner, recalling and organizing my thoughts. That day, I went to work as usual. But because of a small mistake, I got home late. Jobs in small towns don't pay overtime. You work until the task is done. I was reprimanded for a work error and had to stay even later. It was past midnight when I got back. As I entered the hallway, I suddenly heard a rustling sound. I live in the shanty town, in illegally built shacks. My neighbor and I technically live in 2 rooms, but we share one corrugated roof. For security, there's a flimsy main door, creating a corridor. Our 2 rooms face each other. My neighbor's is on the left. Mine is on the right. The main door is equidistant from both our rooms. Poorly built houses generally have bad sound insulation, and this one was no exception. So, hearing any noise from my neighbor's place late at night wasn't unusual. That's why, when I came in late, I wasn't surprised to hear sounds coming from their place. Rustling? Jack stood up. He seemed very thirsty, pouring himself another glass of water. What kind of sound exactly? Be clear, he asked impatiently. Recalling the events of that day, I nervously swallowed. It sounded a bit like someone eating, I answered with difficulty. I wasn't a particularly curious person. Normally, if people were fighting in the street, I'd just stay far away. But that day, because of my work mistake, I hadn't eaten dinner and was starving. Hearing that sound, I felt an unprecedented curiosity. It sounded like they were eating something incredibly delicious, smacking their lips loudly from time to time. Jack listened to my description, his eyebrows raised, his face darkening. He seemed to be thinking of something. So, you immediately went next door and bumped into the killer? I shook my head. I went home. Hearing my answer, he didn't seem surprised, and his gloomy expression lightened slightly. I know you don't like to meddle, he said. And I heard you don't have a good relationship with your neighbor either. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I knew he'd investigated me, but I didn't expect him to dig into these details. I wasn't lying, I said. I don't like to meddle. I don't like dealing with people. And I don't like watching drama. Besides, my neighbor and I aren't on good terms. It's enough if he doesn't bother me. So, even though it sounded good, I didn't go over to look. I just went back to my place to wash up and go to sleep. Hearing me, Jack seemed convinced I wasn't lying and stopped being so aggressive. But he still seemed incredibly thirsty. Finishing his second glass of water. What happened next? He prompted. The noise from his place got louder and louder. I lay in bed for a long time but couldn't fall asleep. I don't know how long I lay there, but I remember counting the mold spots on the ceiling 3 times. The sounds from across the hall didn't stop. Instead, they grew louder, from rustling to crunching. And he started laughing inexplicably. I had to work the next day and had just been yelled at by my boss not to make another mistake, or I'd be fined. So I thought about asking the neighbor to be quieter. Normally, I would never approach him. In fact, doing this was incredibly difficult for me. My neighbor wasn't an easy person to talk to. And I'm naturally socially anxious. When he bothered me, I usually just endured it. If I hadn't been unable to sleep, potentially affecting my work tomorrow and costing me my job, I wouldn't have gone. I rehearsed what to say to my neighbor at least 10 times in my head, desperately hoping that while I was drafting, he would quiet down, so I wouldn't have to bother him. But my hopes were dashed. The guy opposite me got worse. The strange noises grew louder. And he added he laughter. Laughter? Jack frowned. Yes, I confirmed. I'm sure I wasn't mistaken. The laughter was so loud I could hear it clearly through the door. It was intermittent. Very joyful. Happy laughter. The noise was unbearable. I couldn't possibly sleep. So, I finally plucked up the courage to leave my room and walk to the door of the opposite room. No wonder the sound was so loud, the neighbor's door wasn't closed. Jack seemed hotter, pulling his collar even wider. So the killer was arrogant, committing the crime without even closing the door? He prompted. And then? The door next door wasn't closed, just ajar. I peeked through the crack but saw nothing. The sounds became even more distinct. I was about to retreat, not wanting to go in, when I suddenly smelled it. Jack swallowed. What? A scent, I said, recalling. A scent I'd never encountered before. I don't know how to describe it. But it was incredibly pleasant. A very, very good smell. A food smell? Was it a special meat aroma? Jack suddenly interrupted. Then abruptly stood from his chair. He seemed to know something. His gaze sweeping around my room again. From floor to ceiling. Not even missing the roof. I looked at his strange behavior and could only answer. A bit stiffly. Yes. Have you smelled it elsewhere? Jack seemed not to have found what he was looking for. And his gaze returned to me. His throat bobbed. And his eyes were somewhat fierce. Why ask so many questions? Continue. I found that smell too alluring. Incredibly pleasant. I'd never smelled anything so good before. At first, it was just a little fragrant. But the more I smelled it, the more fragrant it became. The aroma filled the air, a particularly delightful meat smell. No. Not just meat. But also a sweet pastry scent. I haven't eaten many delicacies, so I couldn't tell what spices were used. But the smell was incredibly rich and strong. Everything I'd eaten before seemed like garbage compared to that smell. I just wanted to know what it was. My body felt out of control. I instinctively walked into that room. And then I saw something I'll never forget. I walked in and saw my neighbor, who was the victim of the 12th murder. He was lying on the ground. Blood everywhere. His limbs were no longer attached to his body. There were severed limbs and fragments everywhere. It was a scene of murder and dismemberment. I realized something was terribly wrong and tried to run. But it was too late. The killer saw me. He was incredibly fast. Grabbing me and choking me. I swallowed. Then pulled down my collar slightly, revealing the faint yellowish bruises around my neck from that day. Days had passed. And the marks had faded considerably. But a mottled yellow ring remained, proving I had indeed almost been killed at the crime scene. But he didn't kill you in the end? Jack pressed. I heard you confronted him all night. He let me go, I said, feeling a bit dazed recalling that day. He finally released me. How did you manage that? I was almost killed. After he choked me, I struggled desperately to survive. My foot kicked his leg. And the blood on the floor made us both slip and fall. As we fell, I used a nearby stool to hit him, trying to escape. But he grabbed my leg. We wrestled again. I kept begging him, saying I wouldn't tell anyone, wouldn't call the police, just to let me go. But he didn't listen to anything I said. Until Jack stopped me. Quick. Tell me. What did you say to him? I looked at Jack. The tension from recalling made me unconsciously kick the floor tile beneath my foot. Thunk. The tile shifted almost imperceptibly. After my foot returned to its original position in the corner, it slid back into place. Thunk. The sound was tiny. Jack's attention was focused on what I had just said, so he didn't notice. However, his eyes soon changed. Why does it smell so good? What did you say? I asked him. I smell the scent you talked about, he said. His eyes began to change. Rationality slowly fading, replaced by a madness that displaced his usual calm, confidence, and composure. A scent I've never smelled before. What are you hiding? I don't know what you're talking about, I said. Jack suddenly stood up. Still trying to fool me? He seemed very hot, downing the third glass of water he had just poured. It seemed not enough, as he tore open his collar with such force that a button popped off, hitting the floor and bouncing towards the door. Suddenly, he stared straight at me and walked over. I was incredibly nervous, my heart practically in my throat. In a few strides, he was in front of me, shoving me to the ground. He began sniffing around the corner like a dog. What are you doing? Shut up, he roared impatiently. When his eyes couldn't see anything unusual, he started tapping on the walls and floor tiles with his hands. There's nothing there, I said. Before I could finish, his hand landed on the tile I had just kicked. After he tapped it, it made a hollow drumming sound. You call that nothing? He turned and looked at me, his eyes bloodshot. I knew it. You useless person. You've been hiding evidence. Not a single truthful word comes from your mouth. Your neighbor died because of this. Didn't he? The killer killed him for this thing. You're the killer's accomplice. I'm not. I don't know what you're talking about. That's my stuff. Not evidence. Seeing him start to dig at the tile with his bare hands, I rushed over to stop him, grabbing his arm. This is my house. He was too strong for me. My meager strength was like trying to shake a tree. With a single flick of his arm, he sent me stumbling. Before I could get up to stop him, he had already pried open the wax tile along the seam. My hidden things were in there. That's mine. Jack seemed to ignore me completely. He pulled out the bag I had hidden in the hole I had dug. He tore it open. Inside was a piece of meat about the size of an adult's lower leg. He sniffed the meat, intoxicated, as if not satisfied. He extended his tongue and licked it. His actions and expression were sickening. I remained on the floor for a few more seconds, watching him sniff and lick the meat, completely absorbed. I then slowly rose to my feet. Indeed, he couldn't control himself any longer. He opened his mouth and savagely bit into the meat. I exhaled slowly, calmly dusting myself off. I confessed to him, now completely out of control. Actually, I'm not very good at acting. I turned and sat in the chair he had just occupied, watching him squat in the corner where I had stood, devouring the meat with all his might. In just a few minutes, our positions had swapped. You guessed right, I said. I didn't tell you many truths. Jack didn't respond. He was savagely gnawing on the piece of meat, making the all too familiar crunching and smacking sounds. But he seemed to retain some sliver of reason, struggling to stand, wanting to yell at me. All he could do was glare. I smiled, then confidently confessed to him, now completely helpless. But saying I'm a liar isn't quite right. I merely concealed most of the truth. I pointed to my chest. For example, you were right. The real serial killer is actually me. Jack's rationality hadn't completely vanished. His frantic chewing stopped for a moment. He seemed enraged, as if he wanted to drop the meat, to lunge and kill me. But it was too late. He couldn't stop. I savored his movements and expressions. I'd had many test subjects. But, shamefully, before Jack, to create perfect alibis. I hadn't been able to witness the full death process of any of them. I only knew they died ingloriously and horribly. What a pity, I thought, to have missed so many good shows. Want to know how I pulled off so many major cases without anyone knowing? I asked. Like walking unseen in the night. It gave me no sense of accomplishment. To me, the doomed Jack was an excellent confidant. He glared, fiercely gnawing on the chunk of meat, as if it were my flesh. I was amused by Jack's appearance. I calmly explained. It was actually an accident. As you know, the town's population grew, and food became scarcer. People like me, not strong or good-looking, didn't even have dating prospects. Jobs were hard to find. I was constantly bossed around, earning the least money for the most work. I wanted a more dignified life, but reality didn't allow it. It was hard enough to eat, let alone anything else. I heard I could find good things outside of town, so I went. I pointed to the meat Jack was frantically gnawing on. I saw someone die next to it. He died horribly. Before he died, he was eating frantically, bleeding all over his body, still eating until he died. I knew then that this wasn't a good thing. It was poison. I reminisced about what happened that day. It was still amusing. This kind of meat had a fatal attraction for everyone except me. I decided to experiment then, I said. So I lured another person over. Guess what I saw? Jack glared at me, still frantically eating. I saw that person not only ate the meat but also ate the dead person's body. I continued, as if it had the same attraction as the meat. Later, when I checked, he was dead too. Do you know how surprised I was then? I guessed then that the body was also poisoned. I thought, this stuff is really something. Do you know why I wasn't tempted to eat the meat like them? Jack's eyes were bloodshot, showing a hint of confusion. Because I was born without the senses of taste and smell. I explained. That day was the first time I realized this was actually a good thing. Jack finally realized he had been tricked. He was furious, growling as he ate, seemingly wanting to drop the meat and attack me. But it was too late. He couldn't stop. I savored his expressions. Oh, I'm sorry, I said, expressing insincere apologies. I lied to you just now. All those tastes I described were made up. Judging by your reaction, my descriptions must have been accurate. Jack seemed to hate me fiercely, struggling to resist, to fight back. But he could do nothing. I continued. Unhurried. Food became scarcer in town, and people increased. With limited food, ordinary people like me got even less. So, it'd be great if no one competed with me. I brought the meat and their bodies back. You can probably guess that wasn't easy. So I dismembered them and scattered the pieces along the way. Of course, I did it skillfully. Someone would always smell it and eat it. I looked at him triumphantly. Ha ha ha. That's how the missing people vanished. Who would have thought it was me? As for the murders, I deliberately left some meat in certain people's homes. I said. But I'm not a monster. Those people either had a grudge against me or looked down on me. As for why you couldn't find anything, I sighed. When did important people like you ever pay attention to someone like me? Those people not only died, but they were eaten. And those who ate them didn't fare well either. So, you understand. Blood began to trickle from Jack's eyes. But his frantic eating continued unabated. I glanced at his condition. To be safe, I went to the door and checked it again, making sure it was tightly sealed. Then I blocked all the cracks with fabric. Only then did I relax. You must understand. I have to be careful, I explained patiently to him. Otherwise, what happened with my neighbor would happen again. My neighbor wasn't innocent either. He often stole my things. I'm so poor. And he was partly to blame. The weak always like to hurt the weaker to gain a sense of accomplishment. I became my neighbor's target. He stole everything: food, supplies. But since those things weren't worth much, no one cared. Thinking about my neighbor's death, I couldn't help but smile. After confirming the meat's effect, I considered how to kill him. I said, killing him directly with the kind of meat you're eating would be too easy for him. He'd die too quickly. I studied for a long time and finally, through observation, found the most suitable freshly deceased test subject. Then I cut off a piece from him. That night, I deliberately lingered in the hallway a bit longer. And my foolish neighbor, as expected, came out of his room to rob me, calling me a useless cripple, my usual tormentor. He snatched the piece of meat. They say a rabbit doesn't eat the grass around its burrow. But I couldn't help it. I wanted to kill him so badly. It was a bit risky. But I had a plan: just throw his body out into the suburbs, and he'd be dealt with like the others. I calculated his time of death. But then my boss picked a fight the next day, claiming my work was faulty and wouldn't let me leave. By the time I got home, it was too late. He was already completely dead. Too bad I didn't see him struggle before he died. I sighed, then couldn't help but laugh. Oh, by the way, I'll tell you a secret: I was the one who dismembered him too. Jack seemed barely able to hear my voice. His expression sometimes bewildered, sometimes manic. But I decided to let him die with full understanding, telling him everything as it happened. I'm not a professional, I said. And I was a bit nervous and excited. I messed up a bit while disassembling the body, breaking my tools. I had to go home to get more suitable ones. While I was home looking for things, an uninvited guest arrived. Yes, the unlucky guy who got caught. Or rather, my scapegoat. I didn't expect him to suddenly break in. He probably just happened to be passing by, smelled something, and then rushed into the room across the hall. He couldn't resist and ended up eating my poor neighbor. I heard the noise and went to check. I sighed. I didn't expect the meat, after several iterations, to be so ineffective. He still had some sanity. I forgot to explain, the first generation of meat works best. After eating it, you die the fastest. Like you now. If you die, you'll become the second generation. If someone eats you, the death time will be prolonged by half a day. Then the third generation. And so on. The time will also be extended. The killer ate my neighbor, who was already the fourth generation. He had memory. He knew he was eating a person. So when he saw me enter, he was terrified, afraid of being mistaken for the serial killer. He tried to kill me to silence me. I touched my almost broken neck. I almost got myself into trouble. Luckily, I wasn't stupid. And he was foolish enough. I said something to him. That sentence saved my life. Do you still want to know what I said? Jack was still frantically gnawing on the meat. Blood flowing from all 7 orifices. I knew he wouldn't live much longer. I had experimented many times. 1 bag of meat was lethal. He was doomed. Thinking of his arrogance and the trouble he caused me, I smiled. I said to him, "I won't fight you for it." Recalling that moment, I knew it wasn't the words that worked, but that the meat was finally taking effect. The unfortunate killer could no longer bother with me and began to frantically devour my neighbor's corpse. He gulped it down, utterly satisfied. I just found it annoying. I was born without the senses of smell and taste, so everything tasted like ash to me. He suddenly appeared, causing such a commotion. And he even had memories. At the time, I was a bit worried. If he confessed, I would be in danger. So, while he was frantically eating, I preemptively reported him. As for the people who took my statement, and everyone else involved in this case, why did they die? I naturally guessed. Even iterated meat is lethal. To cover up the evidence, they would try to escape or hide. And then they would die. Whether now or in the future, they'll never have a chance to speak. Jack exerted all his strength, uttering a single word, which surprised me. I couldn't help but applaud him. Impressive. You can still speak. All right then. I'll let you die knowing the full story. I didn't want to kill you at first. Getting involved with a private investigator is too much trouble. They have connections everywhere. Resort to any means. And know too many people. Killing you would be too risky. But I realized that since you found your way to my house yesterday, even if I hadn't brought you back today, you would have come. I had to minimize my risk. So I didn't bring you back because you threatened me. I genuinely wanted you to die. For people with stronger willpower, the meat's allure needs time. I patiently told him. So I deliberately stalled, letting you smell it longer. The scent, from faint to strong, is harder to resist. Drinking water also acts as a catalyst. I also intentionally kicked open the floor tile so you'd smell it. You took the bait. You were truly cooperative. My 53rd test subject. Jack seemed to have a fleeting moment of lucidity. A sort of final burst of energy. He might have heard some of what I said. He struggled to drop the meat in his hands. But it was futile. He simply couldn't. Jack, I said. Don't worry. I'll take care of your body. Clearly, he wasn't reassured. He died with his eyes wide open. The town's population dwindled. And for me, food became increasingly abundant. I even gained some weight. I still occasionally went outside of town to find some meat. Honestly, I had no idea where the meat came from. But who cared? As long as it worked. The fewer people there were, the better I lived. Then one day, I saw something massive fall from the sky outside of town. I heard a splat. Intense pain washed over me. I lay on the ground. Am I going to die? I didn't want to die like this. How could I die so easily? You scared me, the woman of the house exclaimed, clutching her husband's arm. Still shaken. That cockroach was huge. The man looked at the floor. There was a squashed cockroach where it had just crawled. Don't we still have that spray? How come it didn't die? Resistance. The woman said. Time to change the bait. She looked at it too. No. I don't think so. The bait works really well. I haven't seen many cockroaches lately. Before, I'd see them day and night. But I've only seen this one in days. The man thought she had a point. As long as it works. Cockroach bait is amazing these days. The woman sighed. Like biological warfare. Cockroaches smell it. Eat it. And die quickly. Other cockroaches then eat their bodies. So you don't even see the corpses. But this cockroach is a bit strange. The man said. Picking up the dead cockroach with a tissue and flushing it down the toilet. It didn't seem to eat the bait. This one has no antennae. Maybe it couldn't smell it? The woman's imagination ran wild. Do you think this cockroach brought the bait back to its nest to deliberately feed it to other cockroaches? The man laughed. Cockroach murder? That's too ridiculous. Cockroaches don't have that kind of intelligence. If they did, wouldn't they be just like humans? If half of humanity disappeared, the other half would live better. The woman said. Yeah. Ha ha ha. They chatted and laughed as they cleaned. In the background, an unobserved projector played a news report. August 24, 2043, Global News Broadcast. Dynamic monitoring of radioactive element diffusion. Antarctic ocean contamination levels have exceeded international safety standards. The world's oceans have lost their last pristine area. Radioactive levels in some marine life are lethal. Please consume with caution.